Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to dive into some ancient ideas that, well, they might just completely flip how you see everything, from your own mind to the very nature of reality itself.
So let me ask you something right off the bat. Are you really in control of your life? I mean, truly in the driver's seat. Most of us, we just assume we are, right? It feels that way. But what if that whole feeling of control, what if it's just a big illusion? Let's take a closer look.
All right, so first up, we're going to start by poking holes in this idea we all have of a solid, stable me, this ego that we think is running the show.
You know, we love to picture our ego as this powerful king sitting on a throne in total command of his kingdom. But what happens when that king gets sick and he can't do a thing about it? Or when he starts getting old, totally against his will, and his mind, just like ours, right? It starts chasing after things he knows are bad for him. All of a sudden, that feeling of being in control starts to look, well, pretty shaky.
And this idea that things are always changing, it's not just about our bodies. It's about our minds too. Seriously, think of your mind less like a solid thing and more like a process. It's always in flux, like a river flowing or a candle flame burning. It is never, ever the same from one moment to the next. In fact, think about this. The you who started listening to this a minute ago, that you isn't the exact same you listening right now. Kind of wild, right?
So that brings us to some hard truths, some things that nobody, and I mean nobody, can escape. We're all gonna get old, we're all gonna get sick, we're all gonna die. And this ancient wisdom, it suggests that our suffering, it doesn't actually come from these things happening. It comes from us fighting them, kicking and screaming against the inevitable. Real peace isn't about winning some impossible battle. It's about understanding and accepting what we just can't change.
Okay, so if there's no permanent king on the throne, then who or what is running this whole operation? This is where it gets really interesting. The mind, it turns out, isn't some ruler. It's something way, way more powerful. It's the architect of your entire reality.
And that brings us to this really radical concept, the theory of mind only. And the idea is pretty simple, but it's huge. Everything we experience, our fears, our joys, our big breakthroughs, it all starts inside our own mind. The world isn't some separate external thing we're just dropped into. Nope, it's a direct projection of what's going on inside our own heads.
So what does that actually mean for us? Well, think of your mind like an artist, and the world you live in is its canvas. If your mind is, let's say, impure, you know, clouded up with greed, anger, all that stuff, it paints a pretty rough, painful world for you to live in. But if your mind is pure, if it's clear, it paints a world of happiness. The outside world just becomes a perfect mirror of your inside world.
And this is a big one. It means that the world, which feels so incredibly solid and real to us, is actually more like a dream. And all those treasures we spend our lives chasing, they're like a beautiful, alluring mirage in the desert. They look real, they feel real, but from this point of view, they're not substantial. They're just created from within.
All right, so if our mind is the architect, how exactly does it build these cages of suffering we find ourselves in? Well, it comes down to one specific mental habit, a little mechanism the Source calls grasping. And here's a simple but, man, really profound way to think about it. Look up at the sky. There's no line in the sky that says this is east and that is west, right? It's just sky. It's a seamless whole. We are the ones who create that distinction in our minds to help us navigate, and then, and this is the key part, we completely forget we made it up and start believing it's a fundamental truth of the universe. We do this with everything: good, bad, right, wrong, you, me.
There's this fantastic parable that just nails this idea. So there's a guy and he's got to cross this big, dangerous river. What does he do? He builds a raft. It's a brilliant tool and he gets him safely to the other side. Awesome. But then once he's on the other shore, he thinks, wow, this raft was so helpful. I can't just leave it behind. So he picks up this heavy, clunky, and now totally useless raft and carries it on his back for the rest of his journey.
And the parable ends with this really simple question. Can you call this man wise? And the answer is obvious, right? Of course not. But that forces us to look at our own lives and ask, what rafts are we carrying? What ideas, what beliefs, what past victories were useful once, but are now just these heavy burdens we're dragging around because we refuse to put them down.
So, okay, if clinging and grasping is the problem, what's the solution? How do we stop doing it? Well, the answer isn't some abstract theory. It's a really practical path for living, and it's known as the middle way. The middle way, it's all about finding that balance. It's a path that cleverly steers between two dangerous extremes. On one side, you've got just total indulgence, right? Just chasing every desire of the body and mind. On the other side, you have extreme self-denial, like unreasonably torturing yourself. The path to wisdom, the so-called noble path, lies right smack in the middle.
And check out this other incredible analogy they use to help you picture this journey. Imagine your life is a log, and it's floating down a huge river. The goal is to reach the ocean of enlightenment. But to get there, first it has to avoid getting stuck on the riverbank. That's self-indulgence. It also has to avoid getting waterlogged and sinking. That's self-torture. It can't let some person pull it out of the water. That's our ego and pride. And it can't start to rot from the inside out, which is what happens when we get attached to rigid ideas of good and bad.
So what kind of mind does this path create? It's a state of, well, equanimity. It means you meet whatever life throws at you. Success, failure, pleasure, pain, with this calm, balanced, and peaceful mind. You're not haunted by regrets about the past, and you're not full of anxiety about the future. You're just here, powerfully present.
So where does this path actually lead? What's the destination? Well, following this middle way, it all leads up to this radical shift in how you see everything. A totally new way of looking at the world, where all those lines we so carefully draw, they just start to dissolve.
And that destination is the deep understanding of a concept called Śūnyatā. It's often translated as non-duality or emptiness. But it's not a scary emptiness. It's the recognition that nothing, absolutely nothing, exists all by itself. Everything is profoundly interconnected. Everything exists only in relation to everything else. Nothing has its own separate, fixed nature.
Okay, to make that a little less, cosmic, think about everyday opposites. You can't have light without shadow, can you? You literally can't understand what long means without the idea of short. They define each other. Well, this perspective says that applies to all opposites. Even things like good and evil, or our messy human passions and our highest state of enlightenment. They're not actually separate things. They're just two sides of the very same coin.
And this isn't just philosophy. There's some deep, practical wisdom here. A person who really gets this isn't going to be overjoyed by success or totally crushed by failure. Why? Because they know that things are always changing, and what looks like a total disaster today might just be the seed of a huge blessing tomorrow. And the reverse is true too.
And this brings us to what might be the most beautiful and powerful image in this whole teaching. It really wraps everything up. The pure, fragrant, beautiful lotus flower. It doesn't grow on some clean, perfect mountaintop. It can only grow out of the dark, murky, messy mud of a swamp. And in the very same way, real wisdom, real enlightenment, it doesn't come from avoiding the messiness of life. It springs directly from the muck of our passions, our struggles, and all our mistakes.
So that leaves us with one last, very personal question to think about. If our passions, our challenges, our imperfections, if they aren't actually obstacles to wisdom, but are the very soil that wisdom needs to grow, then what part of your own mud, what difficulty or passion, what are you running from today, when it might just be the source of your greatest strength?